Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
As I reached for the door, I heard them laughing inside. Sharp, unkind laughter, the kind that cuts deeper than any knife. She's probably late again. What a useless failure. No money, no love, nothing going for her. I heard my sister's voice clearly, smug and venomous, just as it had been since we were kids. And then, as if that wasn't enough to twist the knife, she added, "No husband, no kids, she'll never have a real family." There was a moment of silence, then a chuckle from my mother. That soft, dismissive kind of laugh she always used when she agreed, but didn't want to get her hands dirty saying it out loud. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, completely still. You'd think after all these years I'd be numb to it, that I'd grown thick skin or built some kind of emotional armor, but no. That kind of cruelty doesn't bounce off. It sinks in like cold water seeping through a crack in your bones, and it settles there, heavy and paralyzing. I didn't go inside. I just let my hand fall away from the knob, slow and deliberate, like I was unplugging from something I'd been force-fed my whole life. I stepped back, just one foot, but it felt like stepping into another world. I stood there on that porch, listening as they carried on inside, oblivious to the fact that I was right there, hearing every damn word. They didn't even have the decency to wait until I walked through the door. That told me everything I needed to know. I was never one of them. I was tolerated, not loved. Pitied, not respected. I could have walked in and caused a scene, maybe thrown a wine glass, screamed until I lost my voice, cried in front of them like I used to when I was younger and still foolish enough to think it mattered. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone with steady hands, scrolled through my contacts, and called Richard. When he picked up, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's time," I said. Just 2 words, but he knew exactly what I meant. We'd talked about this moment before once, years ago, over coffee and unspoken wounds. I'd told him if it ever came to this, if I ever reached the point where I couldn't pretend anymore, he'd know what to do. I didn't even feel the cold wind brushing against my face or the fading light of the early evening. All I felt was clarity, icy, clear, and sharp like glass. I walked back to my car, heels clicking on the driveway like a slow metronome, the rhythm of something ending and something else beginning. Funny how you can spend a lifetime trying to earn the approval of people who never really saw you. You bend yourself into shapes, shrink your voice, push down everything you are just to be acceptable in their eyes. And then one ordinary Sunday, you realize that you've never really belonged. That maybe you were never supposed to. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, just staring at the house. That house that used to feel like a prison dressed as a home. That house where I learned to smile on cue and bite my tongue until it bled. And suddenly I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't anything they could use against me. I was just done. My sister Carla, she was always the golden one. Pretty, married, 2 kids she paraded like trophies, and a mouth that never shut up about other people's shortcomings. And my mother, Diane, God, that woman could kill you with a look. She was all about appearances. A proper family, a proper daughter, a proper life. Except she only ever considered one of her daughters real enough to count. I wasn't mad at them for what they said. I was mad at myself for taking so long to see the truth. But now, finally, I did. That house wasn't my home anymore. Those people weren't my family in any way that mattered. I didn't need their love. I didn't need their pity. What I needed was justice, calm, clean, legal justice. I'd waited long enough. And the beauty of it all? They wouldn't even see it coming. Because when you're the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one they laugh at behind closed doors, they never suspect you're the one with the power to burn it all down. And that's exactly what I plan to do. It's strange how certain phrases from childhood stay stuck in your bones, buried deep in places you don't even know exist until someone says something that drags them up again like rusted chains from the bottom of a dark well. My mother's words, as sharp as chipped porcelain, still echo in my head like they were said yesterday. A woman without a family is just a shadow. She used to say it with this casual finality, like she was reading a universal truth etched in stone. not a cruel judgment passed on her own daughter's existence. And I swallowed that line, over and over, through holidays and birthdays and those dreadful forced Sunday dinners, pretending it didn't sink under my skin, pretending I wasn't silently folding myself smaller every time she said it. But it stuck. It always did. I think I was 8 years old the first time I realized I wasn't going to be the daughter she wanted. Carla, my younger sister by 3 years, came into this world like a spotlight in a dark room. She was all charm and brightness and effortless affection, and my mother adored her from the moment she let out her first cry. Me? I was the quiet one. I didn't smile on cue. I didn't like dresses with itchy lace. I preferred books over people and silence over small talk. That didn't make me bad, it just made me invisible. And when you grow up invisible, you learn to listen. You notice things others overlook. You learn where all the secrets are buried and what people really mean when they smile with their teeth and not their eyes. Carla learned how to be seen, how to play the role our mother scripted for her. I learned how to stay out of the way and survive in the shadows. Sometimes I think being the quiet one is what saved me, but it's also what made them think I was weak. They thought silence meant powerlessness, that because I didn't shout or fight back, I was incapable of striking. They saw me as nothing more than a placeholder, an afterthought, a disappointing footnote in their otherwise polished little family narrative. But here's the thing they never understood: quiet doesn't mean empty, and stillness doesn't mean surrender. Have you ever walked into a room and realized people you trusted were talking about you? What did you do, speak up, or walk away? I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments. I know I'm not the only one. They painted my life like a failure, a sad caricature of what a woman should be. No husband, no kids, no house with a white picket fence and a Labrador named Lucky. What they didn't see were the parts they never bothered to ask about. I traveled. I worked. I survived. I got through a brutal divorce that nearly broke me in half. I ran my own business until the economy gutted it out from under me. I rebuilt myself more times than I can count. But none of that mattered to them, because none of it fit into their little checklist of what makes a woman's life worthwhile. They saw absence. I saw resilience. They saw a shadow. I saw a survivor. That's why, when I met Richard the next day for coffee, I didn't come with a broken heart or teary eyes. I came with a plan. I didn't want his sympathy. I didn't need a shoulder to cry on or someone to tell me I was better than they said I was. I already knew that. What I needed was information. I needed access to my father's old trust documents, the ones no one talked about since he died. The ones Richard had quietly hinted at years ago, back when grief was fresh and I still believed, stupidly, that family would hold together on its own without strings or signatures. We sat at that small cafe on Lincoln Avenue, the kind with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs, and I told him flat out, I want everything, Richard. Every page, every clause, every forgotten detail they thought I wouldn't notice. He looked at me for a moment, the way a person stares at a forest right before a storm breaks over it. Then he nodded slowly and said, "You're sure you're ready for this?" I didn't blink. I'm more than ready. I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it until now. What Carla and my mother didn't realize, in all their smug laughter and shallow cruelty, was that my father might have loved them, but he trusted me. He saw something in me they never did. He knew that when the time came, I'd be the one to carry the weight, to see things through with precision, not panic. And if there was anything he left behind for me, any final thread of dignity, justice, or legacy, it was time I claimed it before they buried it under their greed and their gossip. As Richard reached into his briefcase and handed me a thick folder, the weight of it settled in my lap like something sacred and dangerous all at once. I could already tell whatever was inside this file wasn't just paper and ink. It was the beginning of something bigger. The kind of truth that doesn't just change things, it burns the whole damn house down. And for the first time in years, I felt something that almost resembled peace. But I wasn't naive. I knew this was just the start. I hadn't even opened the folder yet, and already I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. Because the real question now wasn't whether I'd find something in those documents. The real question was, what, exactly, had my father been hiding from them all this time? The folder Richard handed me felt heavier than it should have, not just by weight, but by the kind of unseen gravity that wraps itself around unfinished business, the kind of unfinished business that has teeth and claws and a pulse of its own. I didn't open it right away. I sat in the car with it resting on my lap for several minutes, staring through the windshield like the answers might somehow appear on the glass instead of inside those pages. Part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to see in black and white the things I had long suspected but never dared to say aloud. But another part of me, the part that had walked away from that porch with her head high and her heart hardened, needed to see the truth written down, needed confirmation that I wasn't just imagining things all these years. When I finally peeled back the first page, my breath caught in my throat. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. His familiar, slightly slanted script filled the margins in places, notes scrawled in ink that had faded just slightly with time. Richard had bookmarked the relevant documents, and I turned to them with shaking fingers, scanning the lines that would flip my world upside down in the quietest, most devastating way. There it was, clear and undeniable, a revised will dated 2 years before his death, witnessed, notarized, and sealed under lock and key. A revised will that no one in my family knew existed except Richard and, until now, me. A revised will that changed everything we'd been led to believe about how his estate would be handled. My father, ever the practical and cautious man, had seen through the performance my mother and sister perfected over the years. He had seen how quick they were to manipulate, to embellish, to twist affection into obligation and kindness into leverage. And so he left them just enough to save face, but not a damn inch more. The controlling interest in the estate, the business holdings, the property rights, even the trust fund my mother always lorded over as if it were her divine right, it was all mine. All of it. But there was a catch, of course there was a catch. My father didn't just hand me the keys to the kingdom and call it a day. He left a stipulation that I must activate the revised will before I turned 45. If I failed to do so, if I waited too long or chose to keep playing the background role I'd mastered all my life, then everything would revert to my mother by default, and the old original will, untouched and outdated, would stand as the final word. I sat there in stunned silence, rereading the clause over and over again like it might change on the 4th or 5th pass. 6 months. That's all I had left. 6 months to step forward and take what was rightfully mine, or let it all slip back into the hands of the very people who thought I was too timid, too weak, too irrelevant to matter. And suddenly I understood why Richard had asked if I was sure. He'd been holding this secret for years, honoring the promise I made to him when I was still drowning in the aftermath of my divorce and grieving the loss of a father I never truly understood until he was gone. I'd asked him to keep it sealed, to not mention it unless I came to him ready, really ready, to carry the weight of it. And now I was. When I looked up from the papers, Richard was watching me quietly, hands folded on the table, his face unreadable but not unkind. I slid the folder back across the table toward him and said what needed to be said, without hesitation or apology. Do it, I told him. Start the process. I didn't care about the fallout, not anymore. I didn't care if Carla screamed or if Diane clutched her pearls and played the victim, the way she always did when the world stopped revolving around her. I didn't care about their outrage or their fake tears or the phone calls I knew would start pouring in the moment they got the first letter from Richard's office. I cared about what my father saw in me, about the trust he placed in me when no one else bothered to look past my silence. There was something deeply poetic about it, in a way only life can orchestrate, how the quiet daughter, the invisible one, the so-called failure without a husband or children, would be the one to hold the power, the legacy, the future. My father hadn't trusted Carla or Diane with it, and now I understood why. He'd seen what I had tried for so long to ignore. He'd seen their greed, their falseness, their poisonous need to control. And in the end, he didn't leave the estate to the loudest voice or the prettiest face. He left it to the one who listened. I knew the storm that was coming would be brutal. I knew my mother would go ballistic and my sister would try every manipulative trick in the book to claw back what she thought was hers by birthright. But none of that mattered now. I wasn't just claiming money or property, I was reclaiming my identity, my worth, my place in a family that spent most of my life pretending I didn't belong. And I'd do it with grace. I'd do it with precision. I'd do it the way they never expected, quietly, strategically, and absolutely without mercy. There was something strangely satisfying about watching confusion settle over the faces of people who had spent years underestimating you. Something quietly delicious in the way their eyes searched the room for a motive when you finally took center stage without asking for their permission or approval. I had never thrown a dinner party before, not in the traditional sense anyway, but I wanted this night to feel like a statement, not a celebration. I wasn't trying to impress them, not even a little. I just wanted to control the room for once, to make them sit at a table where I dictated the tone, the timing, and the terms. So I went all in. The house I rented wasn't mine, but it didn't need to be. It was stylish, upscale, full of polished wood, soft lighting, and that kind of sterile luxury that makes people feel both impressed and slightly uncomfortable. I hired caterers, arranged for a pianist to play low, ambient music, and chose a menu that sounded expensive enough to make Carla feel off balance, but not so ridiculous it became obvious I was flexing. Every detail was curated, every moment rehearsed in my head. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance, and I was no longer content to sit in the audience while they read their lines. When they arrived, both of them walked in with that cautious curiosity that people get when they sense something's wrong but can't quite name it yet. Carla wore her usual designer armor, all sharp angles and soft smugness, and Diane came wrapped in her usual air of judgment, pursed lips and tired pearls, already scanning the room for something to critique. I greeted them with a warmth I didn't feel and a smile that didn't reach my eyes, offered them wine, and gestured toward the table like a hostess who had always belonged in a room like this. I wore a dress they'd never seen before, black, sleek, tailored to every inch of my body like a second skin. I knew Carla would notice. I wanted her to. I wanted her to sit across from me and realize that the version of me she'd built in her head, the failure, the ghost, the punchline, didn't exist anymore. I could feel her eyes scanning me, trying to find a crack in the surface, some sign that this was all a temporary illusion. But there was nothing for her to find. I was calm. I was ready. And I was finally holding the cards. Dinner began with forced pleasantries and hollow conversation, as expected. Carla talked about her kids. Diane made snide little comments about the house being a bit cold for a dinner, and I let them speak, let them fill the silence with their usual self-centered noise. I waited until dessert was served, until the wine had settled in and they were just comfortable enough to let their guard down. Then I lifted my glass slowly, let the light catch the crystal, and said it as simply as possible. I've decided to take over Dad's estate. Effective next week. For a second, no one said anything. It was that perfect kind of silence, thick, stunned, full of static. Then Carla set her fork down with a sharp clink and leaned forward, eyes blazing like she couldn't quite believe the audacity. "What the hell are you talking about?" she snapped, her voice already rising. Diane's expression changed instantly, shifting from confusion to horror to something colder, something manipulative and brittle, the way only mothers like her can do when they feel control slipping from their hands. "Laura," she said softly, feigning concern, "you don't know what you're doing. You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice or try to defend myself with long explanations. I simply looked at both of them and said, clear and steady, "I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just picking up what you all thought I was too stupid to notice." Carla stood up then, practically shaking with rage, hurling accusation after accusation across the table like a child denied a toy. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "You think you can just waltz in and take everything? You think Dad would have wanted this. But that's the thing, he did want this." And the only reason she hadn't seen it coming was because she never believed I was capable of anything other than sitting quietly and watching her take what she wanted. Diane tried a different tactic, her voice softer now, full of that manipulative maternal pity she'd perfected over decades. "Sweetheart," she said, "this isn't you. You don't really want this fight." I smiled at her, not kindly. "You don't know what I want. You never did. As the tension settled thick and bitter around us, I stood up and walked toward the window, letting them sit in the discomfort they'd never once allowed themselves to feel. They'd always assumed I needed their approval to be someone. They never realized I was already someone before they started trying to erase me. And just as I thought I'd finally said everything that needed to be said, I felt a presence behind me, quiet and hesitant. Carla's husband, Greg, stood awkwardly near the edge of the room, hands in his pockets, eyes darting between me and the floor. He waited until Diane and Carla were occupied in their own separate stages of meltdown before leaning in slightly, his voice low. "Laura," he said, "can we talk for a minute, alone?" I turned toward him, surprised, unsure of what angle he was playing. But there was something about his face, nervous, unsettled, maybe even guilty, that made me pause. He wasn't just making small talk. He had something to say. And somehow, I already knew it wasn't going to be small. Greg stood there like a man trying to decide if jumping off a cliff would hurt more than staying on the ledge, and I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of someone who had been holding something in for far too long. He didn't speak at first, just shifted his weight from foot to foot like a kid caught sneaking out of class, and I waited because I already knew he wasn't approaching me just to make polite conversation. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice came out low, tired, and threaded with something I hadn't expected: resentment. Yes, but also relief. He looked over his shoulder like he expected Carla to come storming in at any moment, then said, "I know what she's been doing, Laura. All of it." At first I didn't understand what he meant. His tone was heavy, and his words didn't quite land until he followed up with something sharper. "The affair. The money. The accounts she's been draining under your mother's name. She thinks nobody knows, but I've seen it all." That sentence hit me like cold water thrown across my chest, not because I was surprised that Carla had secrets. She'd always been slippery beneath that polished exterior, but because Greg, of all people, was the one telling me. He looked up at me again, this time more certain, and added, "I have proof. Screenshots. Bank statements. Phone records. If you want them, I'll send everything." I stared at him for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of what he was offering, wondering why now, after all this time, he was suddenly eager to set fire to his wife's carefully crafted life. As if reading my mind, he said, "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm tired. She treats me like shit, Laura. Like a damn accessory she can throw in a closet when she doesn't need to impress anyone. I've put up with her affairs, her lies, her little superiority complex for years, and I've got nothing to show for it but ulcers and a mortgage I didn't ask for. You want to take her down? Fine. I won't stop you." I nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of it all. Greg didn't stick around long. He handed me a flash drive with a quiet, "Do what you want with it," then turned and walked out like a man who had finally dropped a load he'd been carrying on his back for far too long. And just like that, I held 2 ticking bombs in my hands, legal control of the estate, and now moral leverage strong enough to blow Carla's image to dust. But I didn't detonate them right away. I let them simmer, let them stew just beneath the surface while the rest of the family began reacting to the news of my takeover. As expected, Diane moved quickly, weaponizing her voice and her history and her carefully curated image as the matriarch everyone was supposed to respect. She started calling relatives, spinning her narrative like a spider weaves silk, painting me as some ungrateful, heartless thief who'd swooped in during her moment of grief to dismantle her late husband's legacy. "She's turning everything upside down," she said to anyone who would listen. "She's rewriting our family story just to make herself feel important." What she didn't know, and would never see coming, was that I had no intention of simply taking the estate and letting it rot under the same old structures. No, I wanted something better. Something lasting. Something that didn't just settle scores, but also made sure the cycle ended with me. I told Richard to start the restructuring immediately, cut Carla and Diane out of all financial authority, freeze access to every account under my father's name, and redirect the majority of the assets into a private foundation named after my father. A foundation that would fund education grants, support small business startups, and provide aid to domestic violence shelters. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was the importance of building something beyond revenge. And still, I said nothing to Carla or Diane directly. I let them swim in their own panic, let them whisper and speculate and try to claw back whatever little scraps of power they thought they still had. I kept my voice steady and my movements quiet, because sometimes the most devastating blows come from silence, not screams. But then something happened I didn't expect. Late one night, while going through another stack of old documents from Richard's files, I found something that didn't belong, a name I didn't recognize, scribbled on the corner of a photocopied letter tucked between legal amendments. It wasn't a relative's name or a business partner or someone from a trust designation. It was personal, intimate, handwritten in a way that felt deliberate, almost secretive. The name was Lena Whitaker, and something about it made my skin prickle. There were no notes attached, no explanation, no records under that name in any official documentation. Just that name, written in my father's unmistakable hand, beside a line that read, "If she comes forward, give her what she's owed." I stared at those words for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every conversation I'd ever had with my father, every memory that now suddenly seemed incomplete. Who was she? What did he mean by what she's owed? And why had she never come forward, unless, of course, she didn't even know she was supposed to? Just when I thought I had control of the narrative, just when I believed I was the one unearthing every buried truth, another thread appeared, one I hadn't even known existed, one that could unravel everything all over again. Because now, there was someone else in the story. And I had no idea what her part would be. For days, the name Lena Whitaker haunted me like a whisper I couldn't quite chase down, a thread dangling in the corner of everything I thought I'd already unraveled, refusing to be ignored. I kept going back to that single sentence written in my father's handwriting, "If she comes forward, give her what she's owed," and every time I read it, I felt a strange weight settling deeper into my chest. This wasn't a business matter, wasn't some forgotten investor or a clerical oversight buried in a file. This was personal, and no matter how hard I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, I knew better. I couldn't pretend it was just another name on a page. Not after everything I'd already uncovered. Not now. Richard hadn't seen the letter before either. He was just as surprised, maybe even more so, and it didn't take long before he began quietly digging. Within days, he called me with news that felt like the last missing piece snapping into place. Lena Whitaker had never contacted the family, had never made a claim, had never surfaced, not because she was hiding, but because she simply didn't know. Because Lena Whitaker was dead. She had passed away nearly 10 years earlier, after a long illness, in a small town 2 states away, her name tucked into a death certificate and little else. But she hadn't died alone. She'd had a daughter. Her name was Nina Whitaker, 37 years old, a single mother of 2 working as a teacher's aide in a public school in Ohio. She'd grown up without ever knowing her biological father's name, raised by a woman who had, by all accounts, loved her fiercely and honestly, never speaking of the man who had left them behind. There were no lawsuits, no letters, no scandalous stories passed down, just a quiet life shaped by circumstances Nina never chose and a silence her mother never broke. When Richard first asked me if I wanted to contact her, I said no. I wasn't ready. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I was afraid of what meeting her might reveal about me, about who I'd become in all this. I'd spent so much time thinking I was the outsider, the invisible one, the one discarded by my family, only to learn that I wasn't the only person my father had left behind. And it shook me, not because I hated him, but because I finally understood him in a way I never had before. But eventually, I made the call. I kept it simple. I didn't mention the estate or the will or any of the mess that had swallowed up the past few weeks of my life. I just told her my name, told her I believed we might be related, and asked if she'd be willing to meet me. She didn't say much on the phone, just a quiet yes followed by a long pause, like she was trying to figure out if I was a scam or some kind of ghost. The first time I saw her, she was sitting at a little cafe near her apartment, wearing a coat too thin for the weather, sipping coffee from a chipped mug like she'd been there for hours. She looked up at me with a calm, cautious face, and I saw it instantly. Something in her eyes, something familiar but distant, like a photograph left in sunlight too long. She didn't ask for proof. She didn't demand answers. She just listened as I told her the story, piece by piece, carefully and slowly, letting her absorb the full scope of what had been hidden from her for decades. She didn't cry. She didn't lash out. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, nodding quietly, the way someone does when they've already lived through enough heartbreak to know that rage doesn't fix a damn thing. When I finally told her about the estate, about the letter, about what my father had written all those years ago, she just looked at me and said, "I don't want anything from you, Laura. I've never had anything and I've been fine. I don't need this." But I did. I needed to do this. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. I wasn't just trying to balance old scales or prove a point to people who never listened. I was building something different. Something mine. Something honest. And I knew what I had to do. I rewrote the estate distribution the next day. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink it. I gave Nina half of everything. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Because she deserved a legacy just as much as I did, and I wasn't going to become the kind of woman who shut people out just because she finally got a taste of power. As for Carla and Diane, I left them exactly $1 each, a symbolic slap in the face, a legal formality, a deliberate insult. Let them frame it, burn it, scream about it at dinner parties. I didn't care. Their opinions no longer had a place in my world. I signed the papers in silence. No drama. No speeches. No yelling across a table or courtroom theatrics. Just a pen, a signature, and a long exhale that felt like freedom. A week later, I found myself standing once more at the front door of my mother's house. Not to go inside. Not to confront anyone. Just to stand there for a minute and take it all in, every lie, every insult, every twisted little thing that had lived behind that door for decades. And this time, I didn't reach for the knob. I didn't even lift my hand. I just stood there, smiled to myself, and walked away. Sometimes, walking away is the loudest thing you can do. But sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't overheard them that day, would I still be living in their shadow? Or was I always meant to burn it down,